Ta-ta. Amanda J. Rosenburg, I believe we are live. Good afternoon, I guess, for you.
Yes, hello.
How's everything? How's life?
Yeah, life is going. I feel like we're doing as well as we can at this point, working a lot from home in education, trying to help the teachers and the students of the world connect during this difficult time.
Yeah, one thing I'm not gonna miss about COVID-19 is all of the conversations we are forced to have about COVID-19 and maybe just
Yes.
talk about other things. Okay, so if you are watching this either now or afterwards, welcome to another episode of UXR Conversations, the show that randomly started due to a global pandemic that we were just talking about and hopefully won't have to talk about for much longer. I am Noam Siegel. I am the Director of User Research at Wellfront and also the creator of UX Quests, which is this YouTube channel and also other things we'll talk about soon. And with us today is Amanda Rosenburg, who is a staff UX researcher and team lead at Google. We could probably spend the entire hour or so just talking about your bio, your career, because it's long and incredible. So for those of you who don't know Amanda, I'll just like run through this quickly. She lives in New York City, which is great. Gotta love New York City. She's currently at Google, as we said. But before she was working on Google Classroom, which is a super interesting product that we use a lot these days as parents. She was also at Google working on Google Assignments, Originality Reports, and her work has impacted more than 200 million people each and every single day, which is amazing. Google Classroom, if you don't know it, then that means you are not currently probably parents to children in school. I am. It's an incredible platform for K-12 education. It streamlines both the student workflow and the teacher workflow and the parent workflow, which I think should be noted. And we're going to be talking about some of that today. In the last decade, more broadly, I mean, you've done so much. You've impacted children's programming, education and technology, a bunch of different products. You've worked with Amazon, Crayola, DreamWorks, Hasbro, Nickelodeon, Tiggly. Crazy. You've worked on Emmy-nominated TV shows. And if that wasn't, I mean, I could go on. If that wasn't enough, you are also, I know this, I've seen this on LinkedIn and other places, you're very passionate, as I am, about being a leader in this industry, about mentoring women, about mentoring early career researchers, students interested in UX research, multiple advisory roles. Incredible. Good for you, Amanda. You also have you're a fellow psychologist. You have a master's degree in developmental psychology. I'm more on the personality side, but I promise we won't fight today.
Sounds good.
About psychology, and also done some doctoral work more in the kind of communication, media, learning technology field.
Yep.
Damn, a lot of stuff. So Amanda's legit. That's the bottom line. Amanda's legit. There's going to be some good conversation today. We are talking about building a next-gen classroom and what that takes and what the future of education is given everything that's going on. And the good news is this is a conversation that we want to have with you as well. So if you have any question or any comment, you can simply use YouTube to comment, ask your question. We will try to respond to as many as possible that we can get to. And I just want to mention, if you haven't yet, UX Quest is also these days a newsletter, a free monthly newsletter and a paid weekly newsletter about all things UX. And you can go to uxquest.com and subscribe and follow along with what's going on. Okay, that was a lot. I think we already have a comment. Casey is watching. Thank you, Casey. Let's jump right into it. I like to ask where things all started. right? Just a little bit about your journey. I mean, were you planning to focus on the educational space back when you were in Michigan, I believe,
Yeah.
and kind of just, starting your professional career?
Yeah, so I think it's a funny story, as I feel like most origin stories are, right? I can actually remember the exact moment in my life where I was like, maybe I want to be a researcher. And at that point, it wasn't me going, oh, I want to be a researcher. It was a feeling. And I know that a lot of researchers understand this. It's like this moment where you have like this aha, and you realize that you can have aha moments every day if you do it right. And what I love about being a researcher is that as we become adults, our aha moments are very few and far between, right? When we're children, we're learning so much and we are discovering new things and we're learning about the world. And as we get older, that's not necessarily the case because we've developed all this information already and we have a base of understanding. But as researchers, we get to have those aha moments throughout our career. And I remember that feeling, that aha feeling that was like almost like a high. I was in the third grade and it goes all the way back into elementary school. I was in the third grade and my teacher had handed out an assignment for us to do. We were supposed to label all the continents and turn it in. And I remember sitting there labeling them, writing down what I was supposed to. But as I was like looking at the map, something in my head like clicked. I started like seeing each piece of land as a puzzle piece. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I think I discovered something here. And no one's ever told me that all these pieces of land were once together. So maybe I'm the only one that knows this. So me being me, I took my scissors out of my desk and my Elmer's glue and I cut the paper, pasted it together, and I waited until everyone handed in their papers. And then I went up to the teacher and I was like, I'm done. And she looked at it and she's like, Amanda, this wasn't what you were supposed to do. And I was like, but look, I discovered something. All the land used to be one big piece. And she goes, yes, we already know that. And that wasn't the assignment. You have indoor recess. You're like on a detention because you couldn't follow the instructions to this assignment. And every time I like think about my career, I kind of go back to that moment because even though I had that negative consequence as a child of like, because I didn't follow the rules, that feeling of like discovering something just like was really deeply embedded in me. And I'm constantly craving that. And that's kind of like propelled me in my career. Fast forward many years later, as I was struggling in undergrad to figure out what I wanted to do. I originally entered into undergrad as a pre-law student, and I had an advisor who was very kind to tell me maybe you wouldn't be a great lawyer. So I took a step back and I was like, well, what is it that, I'm meant to do? What's my purpose? And I took a whole bunch of electives and I found myself in a developmental psych class where one of our assignments was to observe a child and, write up a case study. And I remember just like having that moment again of like, oh my gosh, like I'm seeing something. Has everyone else seen this before? Is this something new? And it was in that moment where I was like, I want to do this the rest of my life. And I talked to my professor and she's like, great. It sounds like you're meant to be a researcher. She brought me into her developmental psych lab where we did a lot of amazing research looking at infants and young babies or young toddlers, understanding of gender identity and toy preference. And that just kind of like solidified it for me. I was like, okay, I want to be a researcher. And then as I started to try to figure out what area I wanted to go in, developmental psych was really an important thing for me. I was very passionate about kids and really understanding their developmental process. And part of that is education. And I kind of like naturally stumbled upon that. And the two came together, and here I am.
Here we are. Amanda, researcher, rebel.
Yeah.
That's an inspiring story.
Oh,
You
thank
know,
you.
you know, we really are fortunate, and there are just so many areas that are so foundational to our lives, so important. Education is certainly one of them. I would add to that maybe healthcare,
Yep.
obviously these days especially, and maybe finance too, and just everything to do with fintech is pretty big these days and quite foundational to our lives. What is it about the educational space that attracted you? Because I think although you've had a very varied, fascinating career, there is a thread of kind of education,
Yep.
children, learning, teaching. For those who are still thinking about where they want to go with their career, and maybe they don't have that focus quite yet, talk a little bit about the education research space and kind of what's attractive about it, what's unique about it.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the education space is that I haven't spent my whole career in technically like education, right? I got my start in children's television, working on Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and Peter Rabbit and Super Y. And what I learned from being on, in that area, was that children, I knew this going into it, but it was really apparent when you're sitting there watching it in the research. Children learn from everywhere. It doesn't have to be in a formal classroom. It can be anything. They learn from television. They learn from, all the tech around them now. They learn from the toys that they have. They learn from the experiences that they have with people around them. And
Playing
so,
with a stick, just playing with a random stick.
oh, absolutely. Playing with a random stick can be the most impactful moment for them, right? My favorite is like when kids find things to be telephones, like bananas. But the thing is, for me, was that like, how can I improve those experiences? And that led from television to toys to general experiences, in terms of like one of the greatest studies I got to be a part of and help define was with the nonprofit Kaboom, which builds playgrounds for low income communities. And we did this amazing study where we did playground observations, which I feel like was really one of my first usability studies, like the usability of playgrounds, like what are children doing on them? And then we had kids come in for for focus groups where we had them like develop their dream play spaces. And what's amazing about children is like there are no limits for them. We had kids building trampolines that would send you to the moon, right? Like, why not? And what I loved about that was it wasn't like a formal learning experience, but there was so much that kids gain from, going outside and playing and interacting with each other, and, a sense of danger, challenge. So what's amazing about having that common thread of education or learning through my career has been I have been able to find it pretty much anywhere I've landed when it has to deal with children.
Yeah. Oh, and that limitless play. It's so incredible. I'm a little bit jealous right now, but mostly
Yeah.
happy for you. I want to have a conversation about something. So yesterday I spoke to a colleague. I won't name her, but she's a leader, a research leader in the education space. And we were talking about what it takes to succeed as a researcher with kids or on platforms that involve children. One of the things she's battling with is, should she focus more on hiring academics with backgrounds like yours, developmental psychology, who have experience doing research with kids, or people who have more industry research experience but don't have that sort of experience with kids? And we were talking about this among other reasons, because I actually have a good friend we met in grad school who is, wanting to transition into the space, and she has an incredible academic track record of, PhD, a couple of postdocs in developmental psych, but she hasn't worked in industry yet. So I'm really curious to get your take on, given what this space is like and all of your experience, what does it take to succeed in this space? And when you're hiring people, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably a frustrating answer for some, but it's a combination of both. We're looking at, bringing on a new person. I recently posted about that on LinkedIn. And the way I look at our hiring process is, where is the gap that we currently have, right? Like, where are we the weakest? A few years ago, it was we needed a strong usability researcher. It wasn't necessarily someone who was strong in academics, because we had a few researchers already in that, but we needed someone who really was good with day-to-day usability, like churning out the research really, really quick, and refine, and good collaboration. So for me, it's really dependent on where my team is at the moment and what we're looking for. And I think there's benefits in both, right? When you have someone who's coming from academics with a strong background in theory and has the experience working with children, they have a unique perspective coming into the business space, right? But then there is also the benefit of having someone who's been in industry for so long that can bring in the business aspect when you have a strong team of academics. When you start to talk about, how much revenue is a certain product going to make, how many users are going to be on it. It's like a balance, right? And I feel like there has to be that balance on a team. If you're going strong one way or another, then there's going to be difficulty when you're trying to achieve certain things. For us, it's really important that we have strong theory that drives our research, because learning theory is very complex. And we bring that into the research that we're doing within our platforms on the general org that we're in. So, it's classroom, it's assignments, it's originality reports, it's all the other things that we're working on. But it's also important that we see value in these products, right? Or, a business isn't going to invest in us. For us, we don't do advertising, none of that. So it's, are we getting new users? Are they able to stay on the platform and do everything that they need to do? So it's definitely a balance of those different knowledge areas.
Yeah. Maybe I'll ask it in a slightly different way, just so we can all learn from this even more. You're passionate about mentorship as well, and you're mentoring researchers all the time, both within your team and outside of it. What do you feel like are maybe the challenges that researchers have, given their backgrounds, coming into the educational space, just as examples, or what type of mentorship would an academic require coming into a team like yours, versus someone who has maybe worked at a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Facebook or some other big company for years, but is new to the educational space? Maybe can we compare those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are coming straight from academics, the people that I have mentored in the past, if they haven't had, I don't want to say real world, but outside of academic experience, I actually urged them to connect with, maybe a startup or a small business, to do an internship, to learn how to collaborate with different stakeholders. I think that's one of the things that I see coming in, is when I have a lot of people with academic backgrounds applying, they have never worked with cross-functional stakeholders before, like product managers, engineers, designers. They have been, in their group of researchers, putting out amazing research, but when you have these stakeholders that you have to collaborate with, it's a completely different process because you are bringing in their needs and the needs of the product and having to negotiate what you're going to be doing. And I find that that's probably one of the weaker aspects of those coming with the academic background is they don't have those negotiation skills yet. They haven't been in a meeting with, 20 something people, all with different backgrounds, not able to understand the data that they're putting out, but also like pushing them to like explain, like, what does this mean? Where should we go? That's another thing.
Yep.
And it was something that I had to learn myself through years of, practice was you can't just deliver the research, which as academic researchers, that's what we're taught to do. You do the research, you put it out there, and then everyone else is supposed to interpret it. It's not us that interprets the data. We just, put it out there. In this world, you really have to interpret the data. You have to hand it to them and say, okay, the data says this. That means we need to do X, Y, and Z. And without that X, Y, and Z, the data doesn't really have impact because you're asking people who don't have the background to interpret it, and they have a very difficult time with that. So those are the two main things I would say I have told my mentees that they need to work on or focus on. And you can really get that by, doing an internship or dedicating some time to a startup that might not have a researcher, but has the cross-functional stakeholders that you have to learn to collaborate with, right? As well as translating those findings from just the data to what that means. So that would be my answer for the academics. For those who are coming in from, other companies that have been there for years and years and years, for me, the one thing I've seen is this idea that everything can be translated between companies, right? Like, because Microsoft did it this way or X, Y, and Z did it that way, like that's how it works here. And so I really encourage my mentees to kind of like go in with no preconceived notions, the ability to listen. There's nothing worse. I've seen it a few times and it always goes horribly wrong when a researcher comes in with all these ideas, all things that need to be changed, and you get your cross-functional stakeholders going, no, like, what are you doing? We've been working on this for years. Like really taking time to assimilate to the culture of the company, understanding where they are in the process and the data that they already have and building on top of that. Because oftentimes people want to come in and like start from scratch because they've had a different experience elsewhere. So I encourage them to like, just kind of ease into it a bit and give yourself some time.
Yeah. I had a silly question for you about, trying to apply your previous industry research experience with children, which was, I was thinking this morning about the 5 whys, the 5 whys technique, which is kind of self-explanatory. For those of you who don't know it, it's simply asking why 5 times in order to get to the, the deep insight behind the behavior or an attitude. And I was thinking that, children do this so much better, and they will ask you 20 whys in response to 5 whys. If you try to apply 5 whys to children, good luck with that, because they will just ask you why back and you're not going to get anything. So just notions of how you interview someone, how you speak to them.
Yeah,
it must be just completely different if you're working with kids. What ages
absolutely.
have you worked with in all of your just a big
broad... Yeah. So my experience actually ranges from 4 months old to college level. So I've done work with college students out as well. And for me, what I love about having had that experience that's very broad in terms of, children, is that you see what happens when you don't do well for them when they're young, in terms of what happens when they get older. So I've done research for the Community College Research Center in the past, where I worked on remedial mathematics. And these are students who did not get the strongest start in math, and they're going all the way back to third grade, right? And
Wow.
how frustrating it is for them to have to go all the way back to something that they should have, really developed a strong understanding of, but because of the system, because of environment within the home, a whole bunch of different variables, they just didn't get that strong foundation. So you see the impact when we don't get it right from the beginning. And so being able to go back to like the kids of the beginning and really work to give them that strong foundation is something that's extremely gratifying.
Yeah.
But yes, going back to your original question of the why, I actually think that methodology was created by a 5-year-old.
Yes,
Because
I could believe that. We have a question here from Funky and Bold about just unconventional experience in hiring. For example, maybe someone who has explained data in plain language via a YouTube channel, which I guess is something I know a little bit about. Have you hired people that you would consider had kind of unconventional experience, or how do you look at that experience that doesn't fit in too well to things we're used to seeing on someone's resume?
Yeah, I think for research, there's an array like of different positions, right? We can start off with the entry level, and I think for the entry level position, it doesn't necessarily mean you're coming in with a strong research background. You're coming in with, maybe some basic knowledge of research, but those positions are really meant to train you in the research field, like give you experience, teach you how to do recruiting, different methodologies, asking the right questions. And I have hired people at that level and have trained them up to being like some of the most phenomenal researchers I have seen. I think for, as we move forward in terms of like hiring, it's really important that we have multiple doors open, because that leads to a better diversity of different types of researchers and knowledge that they're bringing in. And so I think unconventional backgrounds can play into your favor. It's the way you spin it. It's always about storytelling your story and how you put that forward in your resume.
I couldn't agree more. I'm not even sure what a conventional background is, to be
Right.
honest. I think researchers come from so many backgrounds. And I know that as a hiring manager, I would definitely appreciate to see that sort of activity or things that you've done in your past, projects like that,
Yeah.
initiatives like that, for more than one reason. So I'm excited to meet more candidates like that.
Yep.
So we have another question, but Vinay, we'll get to that soon, because I think we're going to transition into talking a little bit more about building a next-gen classroom and just classrooms in general. But my wife had a question for you, my more talented partner, which I think is really important to talk about. Part of the challenge working at Airbnb at the time for me was that Airbnb is a marketplace. And so it has at least two sides, if not three, if not four, depending on how you count, but certainly hosts and guests. And so both when it comes to the product and the research on the product, you have to be taking into account these different sides. You have very different needs, very different wants, and it's hard to please all sides.
Yep.
As parents to a daughter in kindergarten, we are now experiencing a bunch of sides. And I'm very curious to hear your take on this. There are the children, of course, who need to learn in these classrooms and leverage these tools, like the one you're part of building, to learn. There are the teachers and their needs. And then there are the parents who, especially in the younger ages, are heavily involved, including in using these products, because my daughter can't just join a bunch of meetings by herself, or look at her schedule and click on all the different projects and links and everything that goes on. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the challenges around that kind of building for children, parents, and teachers all at the same time. How do you approach this? How do you do this? What are your thoughts on that? It's a monumental challenge.
It is a huge challenge, and it's gotten even bigger over the last year as our markets have moved, like our users have moved into other markets as well. So the way we tackle this is we often start with the teacher, because the teacher is the one that defines what's happening on the platform, right? They're the one that does the assignment. They're the one that does the grading. They're kind of, the person that blazes the trail in terms of how the platform's being used. We build a foundation with that, and then we move into students. But it's impossible to talk to students, especially the little ones, without bringing the parents in. So there are times where, I will do a diary study where I have both parent and student answering questions, or, in your case, it would just be you and your wife answering on behalf of your child. And bringing those findings into what we're finding with the teacher. And oftentimes, what is beautiful about doing research with educators is they always want to do right by their students, first and foremost. So very rarely do we find that what teachers need really deeply conflict with what students need or what parents need. And then we also do research with administrators, the ones that are deciding what tech to bring into the classroom, the ones that are putting together the professional development, or, the ones that are on the phone because logins aren't working or a system platform is down. So I look at it as a wheel with multiple spokes. And, if we're not looking at certain spokes, then that wheel is not going to be usable. So it's the same way with our data. We are constantly looking at the different areas in terms of users, and we're bringing that all in together, which means that oftentimes our research takes a bit longer because we have to be talking to all these different players. So the biggest challenge has been to, tell our stakeholders, you got to wait another week, or this project is going to take X amount longer because we need student insights. So I think that's where we run into the challenges, but I've been really lucky because my team is very understanding, and we are a very data-driven team, where research is extremely important to us. So they understand when I say we need a little bit more time, no one ever says well, that's not going to work for us. They're like, okay, Amanda, let us know when it's ready. So.
And do you think it's important to do within classroom research, or can it be between classrooms? So if you talk to parents like us and maybe our children, do you also want to be talking to the specific teacher within that classroom, or do you find that to be not necessarily as important? Can it be just any teacher in that school, or just any teacher in the district, or what are the different levels of analysis?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really dependent on the types of questions we're asking, right? So if it is an interaction that is a workflow that's, the teacher is doing on their side, and we need to know and see how that specific interaction is impacting the student and then the parent, then yes. Oftentimes when we release our alphas or our betas, I like to look at it from a school perspective, because that gives us a really good understanding of how it's impacting all the players within that certain area. But then there are certain questions that, we can just generally recruit parents and students as well as teachers. Another thing to take into consideration when we're doing this is that we don't necessarily want to just lump everybody into one school, because when we do our recruiting, we want to be as broad as possible because there's so many variables, right? So just looking at a teacher, a student, and a parent from one school, or multiple people in that one school, you're then, eliminating other incomes, other regional variables that play into it, access issues, all of those kinds of things. So we try to balance everything by, when we're doing our recruiting, it's what grade level, where are they located, what's their tech infrastructure, those kinds of things. So it's really dependent on what we're asking, but it goes both ways.
Yeah. I'll just take a moment here to say thank you for everyone's questions. We will get to all of them before we end today. And if anyone else has any questions, let us know on the YouTube channel, and we will get to everything. And I also want to just agree with Vishal here. Shout out to all of the teachers. It's such a challenge to be an educator during these times, as it is to be a parent or a child. But
100%.
to be an educator is an incredible thing. I admire each and every one of you out there for doing that. Let's talk about where we are at right now, and then we can talk about where we can hopefully go, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I'm curious what you feel like you know about just attitudes towards online schooling, distant learning, remote learning, whatever we want to call it. What's your take about kind of how people are feeling about this right now throughout COVID? I mean, COVID just changed everything.
Yes. It's turned it on its head.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if we, would be going into fully remote education for a good while, or even the foreseeable future, without COVID having happened.
Yep.
I do believe that, Google, and I'm sure many others, would be developing educational tools to augment in-person learning, but it's gone from augmenting in-person learning to being the learning.
Yep.
And so I wonder what your personal take is on just where are all of our heads at right now with this learning, and how is that maybe influenced by children's ages or other things? Now that we've been doing this for a year, what's the state of online education? I know it's a huge question, but whatever your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a huge question. To answer it, I think I need to start from before COVID hit and where we were. And you were pretty spot on. One of the things that I would see in my research is that there's two types of educators. There was the kind that was willing to embrace technology in the classroom, and were hopeful of tech in education and the future of that. And then there are those who were very reluctant to it. It usually went one way or another. And what COVID did for educators is it didn't matter if they were buying into it or not, they had to use it. And what I have seen, which is actually pretty amazing, is how accepting those educators who would have been like, no, I would never have used a computer in the classroom for assignments, are now like, really, they've embraced it, but they also understand the impact it has on learning. Every teacher I've talked to over the last year, at the end of our conversation, often have tears in their eyes, and they have said that without certain pieces of technology, I would not have been able to connect with my students. And that in and of itself has been one of the greatest things that they have experienced in this, is that there were these life rafts to help them connect with their students during these difficult times. Where we're at now, I mean, it's really dependent on which person you're talking to. It's difficult for students to be removed from their peers for so long. But there's also benefits to remote learning for a certain subset of students, those who need longer time to understand certain concepts. There's more flexibility in schedules. For those who may have suffered from bullying or were having a difficult time in school, it's allowed for them to remove that social aspect where learning is the only thing they're experiencing, and they don't have to worry about the negative social impact that they were getting within the classroom. But then there's also the kids who really, were thriving in a social environment, and most children do. And teachers have become very creative to try to recreate that. And when it comes to how teachers are doing, I think they're tired. They're definitely tired. They can't wait for this to be over. But think they really have understood the value that technology can bring. And I think what's going to happen in the future is we will all go back to in-school learning. We'll all be back in person. But for those that were reluctant to adopt technology before COVID, I do think there's going to be a thread that stays with them. And I'm hearing this from teachers already saying, you know, what's great? Now I don't have to do after school tutoring where, you know, the kids have to come in and I have to schedule everything. Like I can do it remotely. I can give them that one-on-one time after school through the computer. Or, you know, as much as parents, you know, have said like, this is really difficult. And it has been for them. It has allowed for them to invest so much more time with their child, and the positive impact for them has been great too, from what I have heard. So there are the negatives, the stress, the anxiety, but there's also these beautiful positives that are coming out of it too.
Totally.
And
Totally. I haven't even thought about a lot of those things, but one thing I can tell you is that my writing was becoming absolutely horrible because I just don't write with a pen and paper anymore.
Yep.
And I am so grateful that my daughter's learning how to write, because I have been somewhat going back to just, you know, kind of relearning the lessons almost.
Yep.
I mean, it sounds crazy, but
I mean, I have a 10-year-old at home, and guess what I learned the other day? Fractions. Just like,
yeah,
I don't remember how to do this. Let's like relearn this together. But that's
it's a
what parents,
benefit.
yeah. I mean, there are those benefits that are definitely coming out of it. And there's still the struggles, right? We know that by education being remote, there is a subset of the student population that does not have access to, you know, devices, to internet, to a safe space. And so the gap is widening for them in terms of, you know, those who are getting the education and those that can't access it. So there's that aspect too. But what COVID has done is amplified the importance for us to think about that, regardless of if the student is in the classroom or at home. And so these are conversations that I'm hearing in the field that weren't being talked about before this happened. So I think it's making us really think, just as a field of expertise, of like, how do we give children universal access to things like laptops and Wi-Fi and quality education?
Amen to that. We have a ton of marvelous questions. I want to thank every single one of you who sent in a question. Let's get to them because there's some really good stuff here. Vinay is asking about emerging technologies and what role might they play in next gen education. Obviously, you can't comment on, you know, specific things you're working on at Google, but I'm curious to hear your take just in general as a researcher about how much the platform matters.
Yeah.
And kind of, you know, is it a worthwhile exploration right now to be looking at different platforms to make sure that education continues to be engaging, meaningful, and to your point, works for every single student, no matter what their abilities are or what access they have to these technologies. So
Yeah.
again, huge question. Whatever you can share would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yes, it is a big question, and thank you for asking. I mean, I think most companies that are working in ed tech right now are, you know, working on staying afloat, but also working on these emerging technologies, because never in the history of our history has education had a disrupt like this. And with a disrupt means that there's opportunity to evolve. And the truth is, our education system needed to evolve a bit. We were seeing students coming out with no tech experience, going into college really, you know, lacking things that they needed to have in terms of like typing skills. I mean, I've had research sessions where a student said that their biggest barrier was they didn't know how to use a laptop going into college. So there's an opportunity here where the pause allows for us to step back and reimagine what the education space should be. And companies are bringing educators and students into those conversations to talk about these emerging technologies and the platforms that should be happening. And I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a shift in what the in-classroom experience is going to be.
Yeah. We also have a couple of questions from both Vinay, who also asked this question, and also Vishal. Thank you for your question. His mother is a teacher, works with students with disabilities. Accessibility is an issue.
Yeah.
The fact is, I think that I'll say this, you don't have to share my opinion, but I will say that I believe tech, broadly speaking, has failed so far when it comes to accessibility. I think we should be doing much better. I think it's still mostly an afterthought rather than an ongoing practice. And that's incredibly, it's a disappointing part of being part of the tech community. But in education, it is so crucial. It's so important to get this right.
Yep.
So I wonder what your take is on that. Vinay added to that, just what does it take to build an inclusive classroom to address these sort of learning needs? What can you share about the sort of research you do that kind of focuses on that side of things?
Yeah, so both of those, it's taking into account these different needs as we do the research, right? And calling out the findings of those specific groups and really making sure our stakeholders take those into consideration when we are deciding on things, features being built, even small changes within the platform. And it is a struggle. To get people to, I think people are taking it seriously now as we've seen, this happen, this disrupt happen with COVID, and the classroom is very different and it's online, right? Whereas before there were supplements for it in the classroom. So you weren't seeing it come out as strongly in the research, right? Because teachers weren't struggling with it. They had workarounds. So they might not even talk about it. But, the way we have balanced this is we're bringing in teachers who are teaching classrooms with students with that need accessibility within the products. As well as making sure that when we're doing our recruiting, we're balancing out the types of people we're talking to. So making sure that we're bringing in, teachers who can speak on behalf of students that might not have Wi-Fi at home. Like that's a big aspect too, in terms of being inclusive. So we're doing the best we can, and there's always room to grow. And we're actually in the process of talking about that right now. We're analyzing where we need to be stronger and working on making those changes as we go forward.
Great. So many questions. Again, keep them coming. We will take as many as we possibly can within a reasonable time frame. Lilia is a parent of a child my daughter's age. So thank you for your question, asking about how can distance learning be improved. And I think, and there's a second part to this question, my interpretation of what she's asking is around live classes versus kind of recorded or not live content. So live learning versus everything else. It sounds like her child is doing well when it comes to just using a computer and using these educational platforms like Seesaw, but struggling with, in this case, it's a Zoom-based, just live classes. Have you had experience working on both sides, like the resources and also the live experience?
Yes. So I did a lot of research when it came to Meet and understanding how Google Meet was working within Classroom. So I understand her question pretty well. The major issue is that these video conferencing softwares or platforms were created for enterprise. Plain and simple, right? Like that's what they were created for, because no 5-year-old is having a conference meeting at like noon. Like that was not the world we lived in a year ago.
Yeah.
But it's the world we're living in now, and who knew we would be here? So it's really important for these companies to take a step back and, acknowledge the fact that there is a huge user base that is not working. It's not, these platforms aren't working for them, and pulling apart why. And we've done that, and you can see the changes that have come out in Meet because of that. For example, breakout rooms was a big one. Mute all, that's another one. So things like that, and trying to bring in the voice of the user, of like the little ones. The little ones are the ones that are struggling the most in terms of using these platforms, because a lot of them weren't built for them. So it's very text heavy. Kids at 5 really can't read. So having a chat feature in, a meeting might not necessarily be helpful for them, right? But somehow bringing in more visuals into platforms, making things bigger in size so they can read it, having audio. And these are also things that are really important for accessibility, captions, things like that. But I know that at, where I'm at, my team, we're looking at these things and we're pulling them apart, on a daily basis, and trying to figure out where our tweaks need to happen and where we can build on top of to make them better experiences.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, this is a phenomenal conversation, Amanda. Thank you so much already. I mean, I'm just learning so much, and you're very lucky to be just doing this incredible research. My question was around, to your point, we've been kind of reactive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've had no choice. All of us, wherever we work, whatever we do, it's been an insane year, and we've had to mostly react to it.
Yeah.
But we're still also thinking about what the future holds.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is kind of, what do you think, just broadly speaking, are some of the questions that need to be answered in order to propel us to this next gen classroom? Once kind of reality settles a bit and we don't have a pandemic, but we're still thinking about, what we can bring to the future of education to make it so much better. Are there any specific kind of high level questions that are really top of mind for you? Another way to ask this would be kind of the things that keep you and your team up at night that you would just really like to explore in more depth.
Yeah, I think the big one for us is access, right? Like, as we move into the future, it has become very apparent how important access to tech, access to Wi-Fi, is really important. And, once COVID is over, you still have snow days. You still have, who knows? Honestly, like, I cannot predict what tomorrow is going to hold. This year has been a day-to-day living experience, right? But one of the big things we've taken away is, like, how do we make this universal? How do we know every child is going to be able to wake up in the morning and have access to their teachers and to their curriculum and be able to learn? We have an amazing country that allows for us to, every student, every child is guaranteed an education. And at the moment, that's not the case because of the lack of access. And as we move into the future and start thinking of, like, this next generation of classrooms, that I think is going to be a defining aspect of what the future of education is. It's access for all.
Yeah. We have another question here, which I think kind of pertains to this, from Jaya Laxmi. Thank you for your question, asking about hybrid learning. Because to me, part of what I heard from you is that we need to make sure that no matter what happens, no matter
Yep.
where the child is, where the teacher is, they have constant access to what they need.
Right.
And you can be in a hybrid learning position for many reasons. One of them might be just a snow day. We go back to normal, please, at some point. But there's a few days when we have to learn from home.
Right.
And you introduced this idea to me, which I would call kind of continuity,
Right.
which is fascinating. So in the context of hybrid learning, are you thinking about this?
Yeah.
And do you have kind of goals that go for both when the kids are in the classroom, when they're out of the classroom, whatever happens kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say, I wouldn't necessarily say we have goals for what's happening right now. It's to understand what happens when they're in the classroom and what happens when they leave the classroom. And we've done research on this. We actually did a huge international study, this past summer, where we looked at students who were fully remote, and then students who were also hybrid, or students who were fully back in the classroom. And what we were seeing is, teachers really are excited to have their students back in the classroom for multiple reasons. I think one of the most important ones being is that they can actually do a wellness check, right? I think for teachers, it's been really difficult for them because they just don't know how their students are doing. And teachers are the most amazing people we have. They very rarely do you find another person in this world that will care as deeply about your child as your teacher does, right? And for hybrid learning, what we were seeing is that they were coming back into the classroom. They were excited to see their students. They were, doing these wellness checks. What was fascinating was that emotional, this aspect of emotion was being brought into the curriculum. And you're seeing this with distance learning, like teachers teaching and talking about mental health issues, doing these checks with students, really working through issues that weren't necessarily being brought up, a year ago. And with hybrid learning, we're seeing that teachers are trying to balance. So they'll bring the tech into the classroom as well. They're trying to give the students who are distant the same experience that students in the classroom are. And so they're starting to do this balancing act. Like, how can I make sure that everyone is getting the same quality education regardless of where they are? Which I think before they would be like, okay, this child's absent. Let's get their papers together, their assignments together, contact their parents. Like, this is what they have to do. And it's not that anymore. It's more like, okay, we can do this high quality teaching experience, regardless if they're sitting in front of me or if they're sitting, on the other side of a camera. And what I'm seeing coming through the data is actually really promising in terms of the evolution teachers are experiencing in the tech and how they're using it. Like, they're not just using tech for the sake of using tech anymore, which was a very common thing pre-COVID. Like, I'm going to use this because we should use this, right? It's technology. It's great. Now they're using tech because it has purpose. And I think that's where we're going to see huge movement in education, is technology has this deep purpose of connecting and really allowing for teachers and students to learn from one another.
Fascinating. We're getting a ton of questions, by the way. I think this is the most questions I've ever received in a conversation. Again, thank you for everyone who's watching and participating in the conversation. We're getting a lot of questions around global, international research.
Yep.
For example, Julia is asking about, access is a problem even in the US, but certainly even more of a problem in other countries. Are you looking at this globally? There's another fascinating question here around non-English speaking learners, and what all of this means for them. And are you working on this? Are others working on this? And the third question, which is also from a different angle, but these new markets are emerging globally. Everyone needs this access to these sorts of tools. And there are different user needs in each market. And so we want to give access to as many people as possible. We also want to personalize the experience based on, the local culture and education practices and regulations. Oh, man. So a lot of work and many questions. Anything you can share about this kind of...
Absolutely.
It's a global pandemic. It's a global need.
It's a global pandemic. It's a global need. And, some of our most vulnerable populations are not US based, we recognized that very quickly, and we had huge structural shifts within our team to account for that. So we now have a team that sits in India, a research team that has been, that's part of, my team. And they've been doing a massive amount of research. And I am really happy to say that we will be rolling out some extremely impactful things in the near future that will benefit not just those, in the US, but in more global areas like India, in rural areas. So we have been deeply thinking about this, and we know how hard it has been for them. And we're doing what we can to help them have access as well. So definitely top of mind. I have at least 3 to 4 hours conversations about this on a daily basis. But yeah, know that we're working on that. Unfortunately, moving from academia to business, what I learned very quickly is that it's hard to snap your fingers and get things fixed immediately. So we're working fast, but I wish we could do things at lightning speed.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like we could talk forever, but
Yeah, this has been great.
I want to, but we will end because I want to be respectful of your time, and we should get back to our children and all other children that you are serving so well. I want to end with a question from Casey, who is an early career researcher who I very much admire, and we are good friends these days. And she asked a question that I love. So I want this to be the final question first today, and then we can part ways. How has UX research with children changed your perspective of kids in general and the products they use? Do you think of children analytically after all the research you've done? I just love that question. How has your view of children changed in the past year with all of this craziness, with your amazing career doing research on kids?
Yeah, that's a great question to end with. My perspective on kids has changed in terms of, I've always known this, but I feel like it just really hit home this past year, is how resilient they are. They bounce back. They do their best to, um, you know, work through what's happening. And most of the time they're pretty optimistic about things, right? And I think what I've taken away from the students and children I've talked to over the last year is hope. They've given me so much hope that things will go back to, maybe even a better place than they were pre-COVID in terms of like how connected we are. Sometimes, I think to myself, just look at them and how they're handling this and know that everything will be okay.
Amazing. Amanda, thank you so much. I want to give you a chance to just if you have anything to plug, or if you can share where people can find you, if they're looking for you, anything you're up to, maybe outside of kind of your work at Google. The floor, so to speak, is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I will be speaking at UXR Conf Anywhere next month, which I'm super excited about. So if you have the opportunity, join me there. And you can always follow me on my LinkedIn page. I'm going to be doing UXR tips daily again very soon. And I love to connect with everyone. I always, I put mentor hours up periodically as well. So you can look for those.
That's awesome. And I'm just going to say, I'm not objective, but the UXR Conf hosted by the UXR Collective is, in my opinion, the best UX research conference in the world. It's going to be 3 days of insanely amazing content from people like Amanda and so much more. If you've been following them on Twitter or LinkedIn, you've probably seen this. The caliber of the speakers and the talks is bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. So I beg of you, if you are trying to learn and grow as a researcher, as a UX professional, you should go and get your tickets. It's happening the end of February. It's fully remote, super accessible.
Yeah.
There are tickets at available in various prices for various things, and there is financial support where needed. So I'm telling you, this is the best thing you're going to do this year to grow as a researcher. You should check it out. I was a speaker a couple of times at this conference, so again, not objective, a proud member of this community, but you should still trust me on this. Amanda, I was waiting for this conversation for a very long time, and I was not wrong to feel that way, because this was fascinating and helpful, and I'm very, very grateful that you agreed to come on this random YouTube channel and show that I began producing due to this crazy pandemic. So thanks a bunch. And for everyone who watched and asked the most questions we have ever been asked on this show so far, thank you. You can get in touch with Amanda, as she said, through LinkedIn or other mentorship platforms that she's on. You can find me, let's put this up. You can find me at noamseg@gmail.com or at noamseg on the Twitter or LinkedIn. So if we didn't get to your question today, I'm so sorry, but please find me there. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel and hear more conversations. I have some exciting conversations lined up. Not going to share quite yet. Going to keep the suspense going, but some amazing researchers and research leaders coming up. And UX Quest is now not just a YouTube channel, but a newsletter as well. And you can go to uxquest.com and subscribe. I think that's pretty much it. Until next time, again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Amanda. Wishing you a great week ahead. And thank you to every single educator in this nation and the entire world for working so hard, for caring about our children as much as we do. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. Companies like Google are building great technology for us to help us with that. And may we all be back in classrooms and have a little bit of a more normal, so to speak, experience very, very soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. See
Bye.
you soon.